Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Selland. I'm a lecturer in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Group at the Northeastern University DeMoore McKinn School of Business. Today, I'm going to speak with you about disruption and innovation in marketing. So, first of all, a little bit about me. As mentioned, my academic background is I'm lecturing at Northeastern University. I specialize in disruption theory, platform business models, and organizational innovation. I have a bachelor's from Cornell University in operations research and industrial engineering, and a master's of business administration from New York University Stern School of Business in economics and international business. And my research and practice focus is on disruption theory and its practical applications. Topics such as platform versus pipeline business models, AI transformation in traditional industries and new industries, of course, speaking a lot about that these days, and also community driven innovation strategies and related topics such as network effects. I'm also a practitioner, however. I'm not strictly an academic. As a matter of fact, I've spent most of my career in tech and, in particular, in the software industry. I'm currently head of marketing at Acumina, which is an employee experience software company based in the Boston metro area. I've had senior go-to-market roles at a number of tech companies, including a company called Vertica Systems, which was acquired by Hewlett Packard, a company called Unify Software, which was acquired by Boomi, a company called Soundbite Communications, which was acquired by Genesis. If you're hearing a theme here, I've worked for many early stage companies, quite a number that have been acquired, and also a few that have gone public. And early in my career, I was a technology analyst where I really got to understand the scope of the tech industry. I was a vice president at the Yankee Group, which is currently part of Standard & Poor's Global Research. And I also founded a firm called Reservoir Partners, which was later acquired by Aberdeen Group. And Aberdeen Group is now part of Hart Hanks. So I definitely have both a current and present background in the tech industry as a marketer. So I am not just looking at this from the standpoint of academia, but I'm also looking at it from the hands-on perspective of doing it every day, and I've been doing it for quite a few years. So let me get back to the topic of disruption. When I was first asked to or invited to teach at Northeastern, the first class I was actually asked to teach was a course in disruptive innovation. And having spent as many years as I have in the tech industry, I certainly heard the word disruption many times. I would say it is the most overused word. Perhaps there are others, but it's certainly maybe AI these days, although that's actually two words. But disruption is a very, very heavily used word. And there's a very common misperception or maybe misconception. And it's not necessarily wrong because disruption is just a word, but basically it's been applied and is being applied to just about anything innovative or game changing. And for those of you, hopefully many of you who are familiar with the work of a number of academics, but most notably Clayton Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma and many other great books and articles on the topic of disruption, he came up with a much more specific definition and briefly said disruption occurs when a company targets overlooked or underserved market segments with a simpler, more affordable solution that initially appears inferior to incumbents' offerings. And then over time, the disruptor eventually improves and moves up market and eventually displaces the established competitors. So, a much more specific definition than the general definition and the general use in which most people use the word and the term today. Related to disruptive innovation is another concept called sustaining innovation. And although I titled this disruptive versus sustaining innovation, they're really very complementary topics or very complementary concepts. As mentioned, disruptive innovation is about targeting non-customers or low-end customers with a good enough value proposition, oftentimes with inferior initial quality, with a trajectory that improves over time and moves up market. And oftentimes the incumbents ignore it, which is why they get disrupted, which in many cases, and I'm not going to try to go through the entire innovator's dilemma, is a rational decision, at least in the near term. Definitely not always the right decision. I would say in most cases it's not, but But that's disruptive innovation. Sustaining innovation is very different. Sustaining innovation is more when existing mainstream customers are targeted with better products and services, better performance, premium features, superior to existing solutions, is where the quality falls, and on a trajectory of continuous improvement. And the incumbent response is typically to try to get better. And this is where incumbents typically excel. So, incumbent organizations are typically good at sustaining innovation, not so good at disruptive innovation. And again, this is very, very typical. And as mentioned, these are very complementary frameworks. So, the other thing, though, that I really like to speak about when I talk about the topic of disruption is that although we're talking about this as a dynamic that applies to the producer or the seller or the vendor of a technology or a product or service, disruption is really about the customer. Disruption happens despite all that marketers like myself, may say that an offering is disruptive or it's potentially disruptive. Disruption happens when customer behaviors change. So when customers adopt new ways of solving problems that make the old ways obsolete, and they engage in new behaviors as opposed to their old behaviors. So, for instance, a very commonly cited and well-known example, at least in the United States, of disruption is the video era, where Blockbuster Video, which was at the time the far and away the number one provider of rental movies and videos via both video cassette DVD rentals. When in the past we would drive to the store, browse the shelves, and return the video by the deadline. And then Netflix came along, and everybody knows Netflix, or almost everybody knows Netflix. And of course, remember that Netflix, when they first started out, they were not an online service. Well, they were an online service, but they weren't delivering their content online. They were shipping DVDs. So Netflix had a very different model, which in many ways was very, related to the disruption concept we just talked about. It was generally cheaper, particularly if you factored in those late fees, which was really when they kind of attacked Blockbuster. It was in many ways inferior. You couldn't necessarily have the movie you wanted to watch right away. You would have to browse online. You would have to wait in the mail. It would often target underserved consumers. For instance, consumers where a Blockbuster might not have been right around the block. There were Blockbusters all over the US, certainly for many, many years, but that doesn't necessarily mean if you lived in a rural area or you lived in an area where it was inconvenient to go out, or there were many consumers who going to a video store wasn't necessarily simple, and Netflix, I should say, certainly targeted them as well as mainstream customers, of course. But they really did change behavior. So, and it became a very common thing and acknowledged, and of course, with further developments and enhancements like the Netflix queue, where you could basically schedule and have in your hand the number of movies, and you could kind of set up your favorites, if we all remember those days. So the waiting, that kind of alleviated the waiting problem. Again, they eliminated those late fees. You could keep it as long as you needed. And so as they enhanced the service, it became more and more disruptive to Blockbuster. Now, of course, over time, Netflix, through more sustaining innovation, changed behavior again, going back to that prior slide, where they went from the browsing online and waiting for the mail to instant access, of course, when you could start to watch via streaming, binge watching, and also giving you the ability to cancel anytime. So there were additional behavior changes as Netflix moved from disruptive innovation, specifically disrupting Blockbuster and other video stores, although Blockbuster was the dominant one, to sustaining innovation over time. And obviously, Netflix has been a very, very successful company. But again, none of this would have happened if customers didn't actually change their behavior. So the issues with Netflix, we have to wait. If the DVD is scratched, we have to send it back. We can't just bring it back to the store. It could make the wait longer. They were overcome. New routines did replace old ones. Customers were willing to pay for those shifts. And eventually, over time, the old solutions became inconvenient. And of course, disruption happened. So why does this matter for marketing? Well, There are a number of things to think about. First of all, disruptive products definitely need different messaging strategies that help facilitate behavioral change. It's not just about the product. You really need to think as a marketer about what customers are going to do with it. And particularly if you're asking them to make a behavioral change, which is aligned with the definition of disruption, you really need to show them a new, easier way, as opposed to sustaining products, which is how marketers typically market, are more about performance improvements, and that's all fine. But disruption is just fundamentally different. You may very well target different audiences. You would target non-consumers, or even some cases overserved customers, not necessarily your competitors' best customers. The customers you generally least want to target are those who are locked into the old way of doing things, but you would want to sort of build a beachhead with customers who are looking for something different. You would definitely try out different competitive positioning. Again, remember, you will be inferior typically to start. So don't try to outfeature incumbents. You will lose that battle. Instead, focus on things like simplicity, accessibility, and value. And behavioral change takes time. So you have to have different timing and patience. Many disruptors were not overnight successes. There are certainly some examples of disruptive products and services that caught on right away. But in many cases, it takes time. And the early adopters and all adopters really ultimately have to unlearn their old habits before new behaviors can spread to the mainstream. So here's an example. So let's say I'm looking for a reliable hybrid SUV. So if I were to, be looking, say, 5 years ago, or in many cases, still the majority of cases, actually, even today, I would probably go to a search engine and I would type into Google or Bing, this query that I'm looking for a reliable hybrid SUV. And I would receive back something like 10 blue links and 3 to 4 paid ads. I would maybe click a few of them. Some of them might go to the car dealers. Some of them might go to third-party sources like Car and Driver Edmunds. I might read multiple articles. It might take me 15 to 30 minutes. And a number of entities would benefit from that. First of all, SEO, which for those of you who don't know means search engine optimization agencies, perhaps either set up the ads that and they get some payment for those ads, and or they set up the sites and optimize the sites so that that's what the search optimization is, those search results arrived at the top of the queue. So when I typed in a query like this, Car and Driver would arrive at the top. Car and Driver did a good job of SEO. The publishers, of course, would receive traffic. They'd receive revenue. The auto brands would receive site visits. The dealers would get lead capture, and the search engines themselves would get ad revenue. We would also have something called attribution, which basically means a trackable way to know from the search to the click to the page view to the form fill to the lead to the sale. Everything is fundamentally trackable in this modern web world. So we would be able to tell on the flip side whether I'm Toyota, who ultimately sold the vehicle, or the dealership, or the media company, the Car and Driver Edmunds, where this click came from, what they were searching for, and so where this value was added. And so I would have a better sense of how my marketing spend was being successful and being allocated. Let's look at the world today, which isn't the entire world today, but certainly many consumers are starting to move to large language models / AI, something like ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity. So if I put this query in, instead of getting a bunch of links and a bunch of ads, I would get a synthesized answer that might say the Toyota RAV4 hybrid, the Honda CR-V hybrid, and the Lexus NX are good vehicles. I probably would read that synthesized answer. I might ask a few follow-up questions of the search engine and make a decision ultimately. I may never visit a website, or even if I do, I might instead go to another browser tab and type in www.toyota.com or search for the local dealership. In which case there would be some clicking and some benefit, but Toyota or the dealership wouldn't necessarily know much about what happened. What question was the consumer asking? Where did they come from? What did they see? So even if there is a website visit, it would come with significantly less attribution. Typically, it would be much faster. And who would benefit? The user, certainly, who gets a faster answer. The LLM provider, OpenAI or Anthropic or Perplexity, they would get the engagement. But the SEO agencies might not see any clicks, or their clients. The publishers wouldn't necessarily see any traffic or revenue. The auto brands would be mentioned, but maybe or maybe not visited. The dealers wouldn't directly receive a lead, but they might receive a lead if the customer actually went to their website, whether it went there directly or directed by a dealer. And the search engine would receive little to no ad revenue. So a superior solution generally for the consumer, but an inferior and disruptive solution for the marketing providers. So is this disruption? Well, there's really sort of four criteria that you can check to sort of understand if a situation represents disruption. First of all, is it targeting non-consumers or overserved consumers? The answer is generally yes. These are users who are frustrated by information overload, who are overserved by 10,000 results when they just want one answer, and in some cases, new consumers who struggle with keyword search. Is it initially inferior? Yes. Generally speaking, it's less comprehensive than you're going to get from those five articles. Of course, as we all know, AI can hallucinate and make errors. It doesn't necessarily verify sources easily, and it actually cuts off knowledge in many cases, but it provides us with, generally speaking, a good enough answer. Is it simpler, more affordable? Yes, it's certainly simpler. It's giving us one app versus 10 tabs and links and ads. It's giving us the answer, or at least getting us close to the answer in significantly less time. It is, generally speaking, giving us much more of a natural language answer versus keyword optimization. And then, of course, you also do have to remember that, to factor in non-financial costs like privacy and data, in many cases, the search may be free, but what you might be giving up is some privacy and data when you go through it. Now, of course, this may also be true for the LLM, although generally, if you're using a large language model, you have an account with that provider, so they've already got the data on you. But in the web advertising world, there's a cost, even if not a financial cost, a cost of privacy, a cost of data that most consumers, generally speaking, are willing to provide, but it's not free. And last but not least, would incumbents rationally ignore? Yes, they have. Many might say things like it's too slow and too expensive at scale, that users want more comprehensive results. Of course, we make money from clicks. So it really is the classic innovator's dilemma. So who gets disrupted? I mentioned the SEO industry, which is an $80 billion industry, that their value prop is get ranked high in search results. And if users aren't seeing those results, there's disruption going on there. Now we're starting to hear about AEO, answer engine optimization. It's unclear if that's really a viable pivot for these firms and whether the fundamental skills for optimizing for LLMs are the same as optimizing for search. These days, you tend to hear that, yes, they are. But I think there's still a lot of proving that needs to go on there. So I'm not necessarily saying absolutely this entire industry is going to go away, but there's clearly disruption going on and a need to adapt. Performance marketing agencies, which is another kind of type of agency that focuses on attribution, trackable attribution between sites. Again, zero click marketing, which basically means I never click, I never go to a website, I just read the answer, provides zero attribution, and it can't prove ROI. So again, it's very hard for these type of agencies to get paid. The content publishers, of course, which are ad supported, Car and Driver might see less traffic, Edmunds might see less traffic. AI reads the content and sends no traffic. And the idea of monetizing through ads, which is based on volume, definitely causes issues. And of course, there have been numerous not just situations, but even lawsuits between, say, the New York Times and some of the AI LLMs. What you're starting to see is some blocking of the AI crawlers, but in many cases, these crawlers are already trained on the content, so they have limited effect. Search advertising, as talked about, if there are fewer searches, there are fewer ad impressions, period. And certainly affiliate marketers as well, who provide sort of complementary sites. If they're not getting clicks, they're not getting commissions. So there's a lot of disruption. Again, it doesn't mean all of this goes away by any means. That's certainly not the case. But there's a lot of need to adapt because this is disruptive to many types of industries. So what are the key takeaways here? Again, I want to get back to what I stated earlier, which is that disruption is really driven by customer behavior change. It's not just technology. This, sort of drives me crazy when I hear products described as disruptive new products, where if customer behavior is not changing, there's no disruption, at least not yet. That's not to say the potential is not there. Now, of course, who would have thought, if you look at my background here, that the iPhone or smartphones would be disruptive to digital cameras? Maybe Apple did, perhaps in the early days, but disruption isn't always intentional either. But disruption happens when behavior changes. How many of us carry digital cameras these days? Very few. Digital cameras were disrupted by smartphones. And of course, film cameras were disrupted by digital cameras. So disruption is an ongoing cycle, but again, it happens when customer behavior changes. As mentioned, and this just gone into in detail, widespread use of large language models over search engines will definitely drive massive disruption in traditional marketing tactics and force a lot of adaptation of marketing strategies. Marketing disruption means facilitating behavioral shifts, as the above 2 points point to. It's not just about selling products. And behavior change and true disruption follows Amara's law. For those of you who don't know what Amara's law is, it's basically the law that we tend to overstate disruptive change or change in the near term, but understate it in the long term. So this will take years to unfold. There's certainly a lot of hype and attention around AI now. And again, I'm not necessarily trying to contribute to that, but I do believe that over time and over the next few years, we're going to see everything changing because of this and because of the impact of AI on marketing. So I just want to thank everybody for your attention today. I want to invite you to contact me. Here's my email, and you can also feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I obviously won't ask for questions here, but I invite your questions and appreciate your attention. Thank you so much.